Good evening, everyone. My name is John Boland. I'm the Dean of Research at Trinity College. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to the opening event for Discover Research Dublin 2015. This evening's event is about saving lives with big data. And rather than focus on what's happening immediately after I speak, what I want to do is tell you a little bit about research at Trinity College. This event is in fact a collaboration between Trinity College and RCSI. And it's an opportunity for us to basically provide a show and tell of what we've been doing here at Trinity College and RCSI. Importantly, research is playing an ever-growing role in universities in Ireland. And in fact, universities like Trinity and RCSI have bring in substantial funding and creating changing the perspective of, in fact, what Irish universities do. There is a perception out there that universities are academics that are bookish and that are working away, helping to educate the next generation of students, and that's definitely true. But there's a whole other aspect of university life which is perhaps not so well known, about the interface we have with the outside world, the level of research and scholarship, the idea generation, the knowledge creation, and this wonderful scholarship and research activity that in fact is playing an increasingly large role in sort of driving the Irish economy. I mean, universities are no longer insular. We are entities that are outward facing, that are trying to engage Ireland and trying to engage the rest of the world and showing the value of the investment that's been made in education and the research that we're developing and how to leverage that for not just Ireland but also for the economy in general. So it's a great pleasure to be here over the next few days. The actual event will kick off on Thursday at 4 p.m. So this is an opportunity for everyone to come and visit. We hope you come back. There will be activities, some very large number, I don't even know the total number, 70 different stalls and events all around campus at different locations. You can begin to experience the excitement of research, talk to individual research and understand what drives them and their passion to do research. Interesting experiments, interesting scholarship, interesting kinds of problems that we see are really interesting in terms of developing knowledge and creating new ideas, but also in terms of creating new opportunities in terms of businesses and engaging with industry. So we're very excited about the research we do. This is an opportunity for us to actually communicate that excitement on a much larger scale. I should say that the scale is even larger than you might think. There might be 70 events happening on a campus on Thursday. But in actuality, there are huge numbers of events happening at a large number of locations right across Europe. In fact, this is a European Researchers' Night, and so we are the Irish activity that's participating in this much wider activity that's involving large number of researchers all across Europe. And so it's a very exciting opportunity for us to engage with the general public here and to raise the awareness of the quality of the science, the research, and the scholarship that we're involved in. But today's event is in fact a discussion event where we have a very distinguished panel here, and we'll be talking about the use of big data to save lives. And this is a very important and interesting activity, and it's certainly central to the role of taking technologies, IT, and the support that provides, and marrying it with some of the real challenges in the health services, and providing real value to the patients and to the economy at large. So to open this event, I want to formally welcome the Provost, whom I can't see, Dr. Patrick Pendergrass here, to open the event. And so I'll just hand over here. And
thank you, John. Well, thank you, John. It's a pleasure to be introduced by Professor John Boland, who's our new Dean of Research, been in the job I think two months now. Good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the Science Gallery in Trinity College Dublin for the launch of Discover Research Dublin 2015, and for what promises to be an exciting panel discussion on a particularly pertinent theme. Discover Research Dublin is funded by the EU under the Horizon 2020 programme as part of European Researchers' Night, which is now in its 10th year. Tonight, Dublin is joining 300 cities and nearly 1,000 institutions all across Europe to celebrate research in all its forms. Research Night is about inviting people to campus to participate in tours and talks and demos and exhibitions. And as we've heard, Trinity is hosting over 70 events in diverse fields, including biotechnology, robotics, civil rights, gender studies, and linguistics. And people can attend a workshop on bees and pollination, or visit MRI facilities to see brain activity actually being measured, or watch experimental performances of one of Samuel Beckett's most rarely performed plays. And it's all taking place in 18 venues around the campus, including the printing house, the library, the dental hospital, the long room hub, and the college chapel. So there's really something for everyone, and it goes on until 10 p.m. I'm delighted to see so many people here for this event. The initiative of Researcher Night chimes particularly well with Trinity's mission. We want to do research that matters, and we want to share it. Of course, significant research always ends up being shared, whether through new medicines or novel products or books or new technologies. But we want to share the excitement of research while it's happening. That's why Research Night is so well named, because research is a process of discovery. And the aim tonight is for you to get a feeling for that in this panel workshop. We're bringing together 3 major national figures in medical policy and research to discuss an issue vital to Irish healthcare. And what they're discussing is new and has such potential to evolve in different ways. I'm sure they won't be presenting the finished product or decided and settled viewpoints. Rather, they're opening a debate with the idea of starting a national conversation about health data strategy. So in a way, we'll be witness to research in progress, if you like. And I'm sure that there are many in the audience who will have their own valuable research and experience to share. I won't keep you any longer. We're on a tight schedule. I will just say that Trinity is delighted to be part of this European event, and I'd like to thank the Marie Sklodowska-Curie Actions, which fund Horizon 2020, the Science Gallery for hosting this specific event, and the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland for partnering with Trinity tonight. And now I'd like to hand over to Declan McGee of the RCSI, President of the RCSI, who will introduce us to the theme of tonight's debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Provost, and thanks to Cliona for the opportunity to help the Provost launch Discover Research Dublin. Not that he needs any help with anything much. And even though he said that I would discuss the theme of the debate tonight, I'm actually going to concentrate a little bit more on the activities later in the week. And I think the Provost has done a pretty good job of introducing the theme of tonight's debate already. But in RCSI, we have a very long tradition of innovative research in health sciences for the improvement of healthcare. We have also long-standing and mature collaborations with our colleagues here in Trinity, including in the SFI-funded Centre for Advanced Materials and Bioengineering Research, known as AMBER, and our Professor in Anatomy, Fergal O'Brien, is Deputy Director of that. RCSI recognises that excellence in research is critical to the quality of its educational activities and its mission to enhance human health. The college is entering a new and exciting phase of its 231-year history, shorter history than Trinity, of course, but then so is everybody else, with an investment of about 25 million in education and research under a new STAR initiative, strategic academic recruitments, which is just getting underway. And it will include the recruitment, we hope, of many international researchers to the college to work in programmes, including those which are being showcased later this week as part of Discover Research Dublin. And I'll just mention some of those. And first, I should also say that we are delighted that we are able to showcase these projects here at the campus of Trinity College. We would have liked to have hosted them at our own location, but this was already booked and unavailable, and we're very sorry about that, but very happy to do it here with you. So I'm going to mention just 3 of the projects. Mending Broken Hearts is with AmCare, or Advanced Materials for Cardiac Regeneration. It's a major EU consortium coordinated by RCSI that brings together stem cell scientists, materials scientists, biomedical engineers, and clinicians who have established a translational research program developing advanced regenerative therapies using adult stem cells and spark biomaterials that effectively treat damage caused by heart attack. This group of scientists and engineers are using revolutionary biomedical interventions and advanced drug delivery systems to achieve their goals. And just on a sideline for a moment, the whole purpose of Discover Research, I think, is to introduce people to research, encourage, and perhaps the major researchers of tomorrow will be stimulated by what they see at events such as this here or indeed across Europe. And just having spoken about stem cells and collaboration, I'm sure many of you were intrigued, as I was, reading the paper, I think the weekend before last, the story of Anthony Hollander, who as a 9-year-old boy wrote to Blue Peter, which was a children's programme in BBC, and he wanted their help because he said that he knew how to make people live. But that he didn't have the materials to help him to do that, and he was hoping that Blue Peter could help him to provide those. And he then went on to say that he would like a map of all the parts of the body, he would like instruments for cutting up and instruments for suturing, and he would like a syringe like the one that's used for taking wax out of ears, but it had to be very clean. And he also wanted a map that showed all the arteries of the body. And he sent this letter into Blue Peter when he was age 8, I think it was in 1973. And Blue Peter wrote back and said that they were intrigued at his letter and were delighted that he had this knowledge, but that they really couldn't help him very much. But they suggested that maybe if he spoke to his general practitioner, he might be able to give them some information and some advice and maybe some books or drawings. So it turned out then, many, many years later, Anthony Hollander is a stem cell scientist and was part of a collaborative team that was responsible about 2 years ago for the implantation of an artificial trachea into a woman in Barcelona. And he said afterwards that if he had got a dismissive letter from Blue Peter, perhaps his search for research or his interest would have been quenched at a very early stage. And I thought it was a very interesting and humorous anecdote. But going back then to what I had intended to say and talk about, the second project is Drive Against Diabetes. And Drive is an EU-funded research programme led by Gary Duffy at RCSI, aiming to develop advanced biomaterial implants to treat diabetes, and will be showcased also on Thursday. And finally, Helping the Body to Heal Itself is from the RCSI Tissue Engineering Research Group, TERG, and that's led by Professor Fergal O'Brien, who is very well known to his colleagues here in Trinity, and will showcase how scaffolds are used in the body to regenerate tissue and restore normal function after disease or injury. So I think all of these projects are really exciting, as indeed will be the other 67, and we hope will certainly our ones in biomedical sciences will help. We hope will make significant impact on major human diseases such as diabetes, heart disease, and bone healing and repair. So we're delighted to display these projects to the public later on this week, and as I said, delighted that will happen here at Trinity College, and I'm very glad to co-open this with the Provost. Thank you very much.
Well, it just remains for me to introduce our moderator for this evening's discussion, which is Claire O'Connell from the Irish Times. And so, Claire, I'll let you kick off.
Great. Thank you very much, John. And welcome everybody to this event, this discussion on data-driven medicine and its huge potential to save lives. As we've heard, this is the kick-off event, as it were, for the Discover Research Night. And I've always admired John for being very much ahead of the curve, and he's made no exception here because the research night is actually on Friday rather than Thursday. You can turn up on Thursday. Trinity always do fantastic research, but you'll probably find it easier to talk to the researchers on Friday. The hashtag for tonight and for the entire Discover Research event is hashtag DRD15 if you're in any way inclined to be on Twitter. But I would ask that everybody puts their phones to silent for obvious reasons. So back to this evening, and it's all about the data this evening and the need in Ireland for some very strategic thinking about how to use data to better all our health and how we deliver healthcare. It's sometimes said that data is the new oil, and it is indeed a very valuable resource, and it's one we have to be careful of how we source and use it. And we are living in a time of unprecedented ability to gather data, to store data, and to perform analytics on it, to make sense of it on a large scale. And that stands to revolutionise healthcare. It's already beginning to have an impact. Data underpins evidence, and evidence underpins progress in science, medicine, and engineering. Data, of course, come in different flavours, and I think probably an important distinction to make at this stage of the discussion is that when you're talking about data in healthcare, you can distinguish a little bit between the more operational data that help you improve healthcare delivery, and then possibly the more research-centred data of the information we can get from patients to come up with new discoveries and new ways of treating people. But it's very important that the different types of data can be used together, and I think that's going to be a key element of tonight's discussion. And if we are to capitalise on the torrent of data that is headed our way, we need a health system that can both generate that data and that can also take it in and harness it, and one where different parts of the system can talk to each other. That's really important. And I came up with a slightly provocative analogy earlier, maybe, that it's a little bit like trying to put a high-speed bullet train on Victorian tracks that were built for a steam engine. So that's a bit of a challenge that we face. I don't know, Richard might disagree with me on that one, but and I suppose just as a general point, we are of course all very aware of the need to be very careful with ethics and privacy around patient data, how we gather the data and how we use it, because it could be abused if it were in the wrong hands. But I suppose for tonight, we're more discussing what Ireland needs to do on a strategic level in order to be able to use the data in the first place. So I'm going to introduce our wonderful panellists this evening, Orla, Fiona and Richard, and maybe each of you can tell us a little bit about your take on this question. So first of all, Professor Orla Hardiman. Orla is Professor of Neurology at Trinity College Dublin, and she is a consultant neurologist at Beaumont Hospital. She's the academic director of the Trinity Biomedical Sciences Institute, or TBSI, and she's well known for her excellent research on neurological conditions, including motor neuron disease, and as you may remember, Orla recently did the Ice Bucket Challenge for the same thing. So Orla, maybe if you could set out your stall a little bit about on the debate this evening.
So I think data is beautiful. Data are beautiful. I suppose my evolution, there are two parts to data from my point of view, and they pretty much fit in what you say. So I'm a clinician, and I like to operate on the basis of evidence-based care, and evidence-based care is driven by data. So as a clinician, I think that we need to be able to integrate our data in a way that if we generate data, that it feeds back into the system and that it improves outcome. That's pretty obvious. That's kind of audit, really, which is great. So I think that's very important. I think we're not very good at doing that in Ireland. And the delivery of the way that we run our health system is very much like a Victorian model. In fact, the Irish healthcare system was set up really when we had TB rampant and we were using our hospitals to treat things that really we should be able to treat in the community. So there are a lot of data that should be informing how we deliver healthcare. We're not very good at harnessing those data, nor are we, so that's the operator side, nor are we very good at promoting the development or the generation of data that can incorporate the sorts of clinical research that I do back into the health system. And then the third part of data, I think, that is greatly valued and that is hugely valuable now, and that we really is a big challenge, is the idea of integrating those two types of data sets. So there's a kind of a phrase now, we used to use the term personalised medicine. Now we use the term precision medicine, and Barack Obama set out a challenge in the US to use precision medicine to drive delivery of care. And just one example of that, for example, is we know that when we develop new drugs, for example, we have this idea of the number of patients that are needed to treat to get an effect. And the numbers are really scary. So if you have a blockbusting drug, and the top 10 blockbusting drugs in the United States that are used, it requires between 3 and 24 patients to treat with that drug in order to get an effect. So the worst of those is you have to have 24 patients treated to get one patient effective. So we now are living in a situation where there's enough data being generated, if we incorporate it properly, to actually make sure that the right drug gets the right person at the right time in the right place, and it should significantly reduce that need to treat, the number of patients needed to treat. So data will allow us to drive that, but the data has to be incorporated into a system that includes things like us being able to characterise patients properly, being able to feed that into a system that allows that characterisation to develop into a coherent strategy. And so my final stall is that we need some system in Ireland to allow us to do that properly. And I'm going to challenge our HSE colleagues that should be something around like a National Institute of Health Research that allows us to incorporate all of those things to the great benefit of the Irish health service. So that's about 10 points in about 2 sentences.
Okay. Many of which we will come back to. So Fiona Cahill is the CEO of the National Office of Clinical Audit. And Fiona very kindly stepped in for Mr. Ken Mealy, who couldn't make it this evening. Fiona, you work with Ken.
I do indeed.
And maybe you could tell us a little bit about what the National Office of Clinical Audit does.
Thank you very much. First of all, I suppose from research night, the National Office of Clinical Audit was brought about through another RCSI partnership with the HSE to actually commission what would be clinical audit, not only the methodologies, not only the collection tools, but the monitoring and the review of the output of the data to ensure that the output of the data could actually be used then to actually impact and inform change. Okay, so and as a byproduct of that, then also to inform future research. And some of our audits actually have come from research that had been done in the past that identified there were weaknesses or deficiencies. So our clinical audit is based on a continual cycle of audit. So not just a snapshot study or cohort study that may actually be done, valuable as they are. This is to evaluate practice on a continual basis over several specialties. And I think Orla has said, and you stated, we're really bad at maybe not promoting and self-promoting. And there's been a reason for that from both the HSE, our Quality Improvement Division department, which fully backs us, from RCSI's perspective, and from the National Office of Clinical Audit. At the very earliest stages of collecting quality information from hospitals, you actually want to make sure that it is quality information. You want to make sure that it is being reviewed properly and that it is actually being actioned and used by the people who actually it is intended for before you start promoting. Okay? So for the National Office of Clinical Audit, we absolutely do want to get to national reporting, and we are already with some of our projects. But what we want to actually have done before the glossy reports come out is that we know that the actual individuals at hospitals who own the data, who actually have reviewed the data, have actually started to action the changes required from it. And to us, that's more important than the glossy reports or the publications of the dreaded league tables or anything else that may be expected from it. Okay.
Well, could you tell us a little bit about the areas that you are auditing? Are there particular things
absolutely.
You're looking at?
We are covering more than surgery. We are our governance board, which President McGee is a member of, is made up of all of the medical training bodies and affiliated faculties around. So what we're actually covering at the moment is we have hip fracture database. We have that is looking at the frail elderly, time to surgery, and the outcomes for our frail elderly patients. We have major trauma audit, which is collecting data from both pre-hospital care as to how they were managed from the site of an injury all the way through to their rehab. Okay, we have ICU audit, which is in live deployment at the moment, and we have hospital standard mortality rates, an audit which is only new and in deployment. There are several others. We're also supporting the work of Professor Richard Green in Cork with the National Perinatal Epidemiology Centre. And we're working with our HSE colleagues again in exploiting as much as possible of hospital inpatient information to a quality system so that you can actually feed back information to clinicians. So there's about at the moment 6 or 7 live projects that are either at development and the collection of the data stage to others who are actually monitoring, reviewing and impacting the change out of the results that they're getting back from our audit.
Okay, because a basic premise, I suppose, is that with data, it's garbage in, garbage out. So the quality of the data going in, you have to get that. By the way, I'm kind of flip-flopping between using data as plural and singular, so I hope we don't have any sort of Oxford English Dictionary people.
Data.
Oh no, I
Data
know it is
singular.
plural, 1 datum, 2 data, but unfortunately many people use it as data, so as singular, so I will probably accidentally do so. But I suppose, yeah, that is the quality of the data that are going in to the studies needs to be absolutely top-notch, or else there's really no point in doing these studies and then basing policies on them. So Richard Corbridge, you're the first Chief Information Officer of the HSE. Well done. And you are also the CEO of eHealth Ireland. So you took up the post of Chief Information Officer earlier this year, I think. So late last year. So can you tell us what you do?
Crikey, that's a wide question. I guess, putting tonight's perspective on it, what we're trying to do around research and data in particular is take that huge amount of, let's call it the water of health data. We're trying to put the hose pipe on the end of it and the nozzle on the end of it to actually turn it into something useful. So there is so much data in health globally. Tons and tons of data collected, whether it's carbon paper and people scribbling notes, whether it's on the back of a beer mat or whether it's in a digital solution.
I hope my patient records aren't on the back of a beer mat. But no, I know what you mean. There are lots of different formats, okay?
We don't, globally, not just in Ireland, turn it into knowledge very easily. So one of the premises of eHealth Ireland and the systems we're deploying is how do we turn data into information that drives insight, that creates knowledge, i.e. allows us to do research that creates knowledge. And a lot of the premises of what we're trying to do, working with the Audit Office, working with other parts of the HSE, is to ensure that when we collect information, where appropriate, it can be reused. And also that we shouldn't be collecting information just for the purposes of counting beans. And I think that's really important from a clinical practice point of view, is as soon as we ask people to start collecting information just so we know how many things are happening, then people lose interest in what they're doing and why they do it. And that's so important, and such a strong lesson learned from other jurisdictions is the reuse of data where appropriate, where consent is appropriately collected, where the right people are viewing it for the right reasons, or where data is anonymised, is crucial to actually taking this journey together and making sure that clinical provision and clinical research can go hand in hand in moving the agenda forward.
Great. Can I ask you, are there any big practical challenges at the moment in Ireland to collecting those data?
Yes. I think
from an IT perspective?
From an IT perspective, absolutely. I mean, it's a matter of public record. The investment in technology in health has not been forthcoming for 10, 15 years. We're picking up the pieces of the Victorian Railway and trying to make the bullet train run on that Victorian Railway. And as quickly as we're doing that, we're trying to lay down the new railway in front of it so it doesn't come off at the end. It is a really important piece to actually be able to put that infrastructure in place. The eHealth Ireland programmes, of which there are 8 strategic programmes, are all moving forward at a different pace, but with some quite significant success in the last 9 months and between now and the end of the year. Somebody tweeted this morning that the CIO of Ireland has to have 3 bones, a backbone to be able to put up with how on earth they do this, a funny bone to see the funny side of it, and a wishbone. I think that's probably quite true at the moment, the wishbone in particular, but Brilliant. It does matter, that side of it.
Okay. Orla, you mentioned just at the end of your 10-point manifesto, you mentioned that you would like to see a sort of an oversight body, a little bit like the NIHR in the UK, which is the National Institute for Health Research.
Yes.
Yeah, there's so many acronyms in this whole field. Tell us a little bit more about what you see that doing.
So it's kind of a vision thing. So the idea is that if you're like me and you some of your life you're seeing patients as a clinician, and some of your life you're doing research, and the research is funded by government funding agencies such as the Health Research Board, which a lot of my work is, and we do work. We put in a grant to the Health Research Board, and most of the time we don't get the grant, but sometimes we do, and that allows us to ask some questions, and some of our grants are on health services, and one of the problems that became very clear to me in my career is that our ability subsequently, first of all, the sorts of questions that we ask aren't necessarily always really that well aligned with the sorts of needs that we have, in Ireland. And that's true, and the HRB has acknowledged this, and they've tried to put, the questions in sort of a framework that fits in with what we need in Ireland. But the other side of that, so that's the beginning of the hose, and then the nozzle at the other end doesn't really work either. In fact, it doesn't exist a lot of the time. So the idea that if we generate work, either funded by the HRB or some of the clinical leads programs in which we've been engaged, and we generate an output or something that is meaningful and could inform policy, there isn't really a mechanism through which that can be re-engineered back into a political or a policy decision. So the UK had the same problem actually, and it's England and Scotland has it as well, of disparate pieces of work. And I think my research is really important, which it clearly is, because, but everybody else thinks their research is very important as well. And finding some way of integrating the sort of work that we do back into a strategic framework. This was a problem in the UK 10 or 15 years ago. And Sally Davis, who is the first leader of the NIHR now, the Chief Medical Officer in the UK, was charged to try and integrate this in a way that made it meaningful, that made the sort of work that clinicians do, and clinicians in its broadest sense, not just doctors, can inform how the health service is delivered. And I think, looking at the outside, I know that people are very critical of it, in some aspects. I think it's been overwhelmingly much more successful than when the NIHR wasn't there. So the NIHR now is a body, it's built within the Department of Health in England. There's one in Scotland as well. The one in England is run by Sally Davis. And what they do is they set out the requirements from a research point of view that are strategically necessary. And then that work is there's a call. Now, you know more, you've just come from that, so I'm actually stealing your clothes, really. But my understanding is, from talking to my colleagues in the UK, that there are facilities for building well-developed integrated networks where the sum is greater than the parts. So there's a call, maybe, for example, to set up, I do neurological research, and so I'm very jealous of the sorts of networks that can take place, that are set up through the NIHR in the UK, both to generate epidemiologic research, but also to generate clinical trials and to identify needs within a domain. So I think we could do that very well. It could incorporate, it wouldn't eat you, it should just incorporate the National Centre for Clinical Research, for Clinical Audit. But I think it has a much wider domain than that.
So this would be almost like a sort of a central repository, sort of the body of the octopus, as it were, and the tentacles go everywhere, and everybody just feeds into the one place?
I think
and
so,
so everybody,
yeah.
so that,
I think so, yes.
People who are, because as I understand it at the moment, the information is quite siloed, as sort of medical departments and research departments often tend to be. So, I know there's a push towards interdisciplinary working, but as you say, the results aren't going into a common repository.
So for example, I'll give you a very good example. We're a small island nation, and we have a population of about 4.5 million in Ireland. And Ireland is a great place to do epidemiologic research, which is a lot of my work is based on epidemiology. And we run a register for motor neuron disease. We've run it for 21 years. It's the longest running register in the world of its kind, and we're internationally recognised for what we do. We've generated quite a lot of data from that register. But there's nothing to say that, there's nothing to stop us doing these sorts of registers in other disease domains, in other disease areas. In fact, we should be doing that. It should be possible to do that. It's actually quite difficult to do that at the moment. There isn't really a mechanism in Ireland, even though there are huge advantages to having registers. And a really good example, our one has been very good for my career, in addition to, I think, really changing how we deliver care for people with motor neuron disease in Ireland, allowing us to bring in clinical trials for motor neuron disease in Ireland as well. But a much better example of how you could use a register is the cancer register. So the cancer register was set up by Harry Comer in the 1990s, around the same time we set up the motor neuron disease register. And the cancer register has really informed the entire cancer strategy thereafter. Now, we really should learn from those successes. There's lots of good parts of what we do in the Irish health system, and there's a huge potential natural advantage that we have in Ireland, being an Irish, being an island and having a relatively stable population and very connected, interconnected population. So it's actually quite difficult to get lost to follow up in Ireland. You can usually find we can usually find people because people are very well connected. So it's a great place to do this sort of research from a research point of view, but it's also, we should be doing it because it really helps us deliver healthcare. And the cancer strategy is the really best example of how we could do that. So if we did that under an umbrella of an NIHR, we could put together, we could use what we've done really successfully in cancer in lots of other areas, or what we've done in a much more sort of confined way for motor neuron disease. We could learn from both those sorts of initiatives, and we could build a really good research-driven, audit-driven healthcare system. So,
can I ask you if you have any specific examples of what has come out of the ALS registry, for instance? What kind of discoveries have you been able to make because of the data in there?
So we first of all, the incidence and prevalence of motor neuron disease, we know about that. We do something called deep phenotyping, and my interest in precision medicine has come out of that, this idea that motor neuron disease is a single disease. It's not. We discovered one of the genes actually in 2007 in motor neuron disease, and we've been involved in subsequent discoveries as well. We know it's a relatively heterogeneous disease, and we know that the 40% of people with motor neuron disease develop thinking trouble. That was heretical about 15 years ago, or 10 years ago even. We're the leaders in that area. We most recently made a really important discovery, which is that people with motor neuron disease, that the genes that are responsible, some genes that are responsible for motor neuron disease, are linked to the genes that are responsible for schizophrenia. That's really quite revolutionary. It allows us to cordon off a proportion of people with motor neuron disease that have this signal that is telling us something really important about the biology of the disease. What we do in Ireland then is we feed our discoveries and our insights into our European and worldwide consortium. We're very active members of the European ALS consortium. Out of those insights, we're doing things like we're sequencing the genomes of these people where we're seeing that signal, doing whole genome sequencing, which is very expensive actually, but also looking at summary data from these genomic analyses with summary data from other diseases like schizophrenia, and finding where those genes are with our international consortium. So we're really pushing the field forward just because we're a small integrated society, and we're able to find all the people in Ireland with motor neuron disease, and people with motor neuron disease have been very kind and have collaborated with us.
I assume their families give data as well.
Families give data.
And
we've just got ethics approval to look at families as well, and we're part of a big international consortium called Project Mine, which is mining the data of people with motor neuron disease, and we're actually in the middle of a big crowd-raising campaign to raise sufficient funding for doing this genome sequencing in the Irish population, which will tell us a lot about the Irish genetic structure in addition to about the genetics of motor neuron disease, and will feed into a big international consortium of 16,000 genomes of motor neuron disease.
So on the basis of Irish people giving a little bit of their time, giving you some clinical, some sort of medical history, clinical information, maybe a sample for genome analysis. Based on each person doing that, you can then make discoveries that make a difference on an international stage.
So what we do is we link that in with what we call the deep phenotyping. So it's a lot more.
Explain deep phenotyping.
Deep phenotyping is you look at the patient and you look at everything you could possibly look at about the person you get there. We do full detailed examination, we do neuropsychological examination, we do imaging, we're doing EEG and bioengineering, spectral EEG, and I was looking at the signals in the brain. We're taking their DNA, we're taking samples of serum, and we're integrating all of that into a massive big data set.
Yes.
And those data are then driving our analytics around how you put people into different groups, which will inform the development of a precision medicine approach towards motor neuron disease. We've had 40 clinical trials of motor neuron disease in the world, and they've all failed. The most recent one cost $100 million, and it failed. So we have to think cleverly about this. Data are going to drive that, and we're contributing to that. But that's just one very small example of a rare disease where you can really do something with generating really high-powered data. Ireland's a great place to do this sort of research, and we really should be grasping the natural advantages we have as an island nation not only to fix our really broken health system, but to put ourselves as the leaders of these sort of data-driven approaches. This is the era of precision medicine. It's the year of small groups. It's the year of really getting to grips with the differences in diseases and differences within diseases so that we can really be sensible and clever about how we treat people in the future.
Great. Has anybody in the audience got any questions? We're very keen to hear from you as well. Anybody? Lady in the front there. I think, is there a roving mic? Or yeah, it's on its way down to you. I want you all to be thinking up your questions now as well.
Pressure. I was just wondering, and I know, Richard, that you discussed this during the week with the maternal newborn data identifying codes. I couldn't make that conference, and I was just wondering if you'd be willing to share some of your experiences or thoughts on how that's going to generate and how that's going to work to feed into obstetric and infant research.
Okay, I guess the easiest thing to talk about is, so what's been referred to there is, this week is the final stage, all week, of future state validation of the maternity and newborn system. So something that's been coming to Ireland for a long time is an electronic health record for pregnant women and babies. What we've done over the last 9 months is ensure that the system is being clinically designed so that when it is deployed into Ireland, clinicians can use it on the day it's deployed. And next year, the first 4 of 19 maternity hospitals will go live with that electronic health record for babies. Now, the way that then feeds into clinical research and some of what Orla has been talking around already is absolutely about the information that then is collected, because that is data from pregnancy through to birth and through to early stage care of the mother and the baby as they're born. And the kind of information, all tests, all information about the growth, all information about illnesses and treatments that are there, becomes that core amount of data to then start to build upon from there. And that's why all this comment about the NIHR, whilst is a huge organisation with huge investment, one of the things that I've learned today just by being with these guys is that we don't join up. A health research institute that could join up the thinking from health with research and academia would be so powerful. We're looking at the epilepsy electronic health record as well, and how can we reuse the information in there, and the fact we have a cohort of patients who, if we sequence their genome, would actually receive treatment, not research, would receive treatment that would ensure they had less seizures and would be a weller person with an illness like epilepsy. So how do we join those things up and stop working in an academic and health providing silo? It's so important that we find a route to do that, whether it is a NIHR type function or something else. Doesn't really matter. It's knock down the walls that are in the way that matters the most.
And can you tell us about how the electronic health record could be rolled out to the rest of the population? Because it strikes me as one of the most enabling things for a sort of digitally relevant healthcare system. So how's that going?
Yeah, so the individual health identifier, the index for the electronic health record, is available before the end of this month. So everybody in Ireland will have an individual health identifier. That means that when records are shared from one system to the next, from one organisation to the next, we can guarantee that we're talking about the same person. It's really important that as a building block was put in place first to make sure that when we're referencing people across different organisations, it's there.
Now, as citizens, are we going to get a number like our Irish Water or
No.
PPS? No?
Absolutely not.
Okay, you're not going down that route.
So you won't receive an envelope with a piece of paper that you then lose. What you will, the way the IHI works is it's not about the delivery of healthcare for you. It's not a requirement for you to have it when you turn up in healthcare. The individual health identifier is absolutely for providing healthcare and joining up that system. It's patient safety, it's patient efficiency. That isn't to say it's a secret identifier you don't know either. So very much when you are in care, you can ask your clinician, what is your individual health identifier? You don't need to know it. I would suggest as it's a 10-digit figure, you promptly forget it. But it's there to make sure that things
This is in lieu
hook
of
together.
your date of birth and your mother's maiden name, is
Absolutely.
it? Okay, good stuff, good stuff. Fiona, can you tell us a little bit about how the data, I mean, I know it's early days yet, you know, but I mean, how are those data going to have an impact? Or is there anywhere they're already having an impact
Yes,
on how we deliver
absolutely,
care?
absolutely. Just actually to second and to add to the answer, Richard's answer, in relation to obstetrics and maternal care. NOCA are actually working, the National Office of Clinical Audit, excuse the acronyms, we're actually working with Professor Richard Green in Cork, who has been doing fantastic audit already and can't wait for this system to be delivered, because he's been collecting audit data from all of the maternity units in the country over the last number of years. He has data going back, I'd say there's about 7 or 8 years data there, okay? We're not really good about promoting that unless there's a problem, and Richard Green, Professor Green, is asked to come on prime time or come on to Morning Ireland to talk about how good or how bad our data is, okay? And how good or bad our outcomes are. And historically, our maternal figures are actually really well benchmarked against anything else internationally. So that's already informing the system. So without the IT systems to collect it more fluidly, there is really good audit has been going on in Ireland over the last number of years. Okay, so we're delighted to partner with them to help promote that. Secondly, from our perspective, from what we're actually doing from data we started to collect ourselves as origin data, the major trauma is the best example of what's already starting to inform service. The Minister commissioned a committee to actually inform the configuration of trauma services in Ireland, and he's expecting output of this committee in spring of 2016, and it will determine where the best places in Ireland are for trauma patients to actually be treated. Should we have 2? Should we have 3, 4, 6? What is the optimum number, and what are the staffing levels required to actually staff a trauma centre, a major trauma centre? So our data from the major trauma audit is already informing that. So instead of historical anecdotal information, one specialty over another insisting that they had the most patients and therefore they were the most important in a particular hospital or other. We're actually giving informed information back to the system so that they can actually use it to inform service. The same will come through our ICU audit and through our hip fracture database. So all of them will eventually inform the service, but it takes time. And your ALS register has been established over a long number of years, and the reference to the cancer register, they've been long established registers which have had time to bed in to validate that the data sets that they were collecting was accurate. Richard mentioned are we collecting the right data? Not to collect too much data. Don't just collect data for the sake of data. We've sat down with lots of clinicians in the last couple of years who come with fantastic ideas for be it a clinical audit or a study they want to do, and the data set is including the coffee and the dry cleaning and everything, okay? We don't need to collect too much data. We need to collect accurate, correct data for what it is, the questions that we're asking. So helping the clinicians to come up with those questions to make sure that we're not just awash with information for the sake of it is extremely important. And then I think from our perspective, the knowing that at hospital level, so there's informing national strategy and national policy, as I've mentioned, with the trauma data, and as we will do across the other streams. What's more important from our perspective is the hospitals actually using the data themselves. You mentioned silos. All of our clinicians do work with hats on that are very, very specific to their specialty, and rightly so for the purpose of what it is that they're doing with their particular patient.
But if I'm a patient, I want to be dealt with
Absolutely.
by a specialist.
Absolutely, so the move over the last number of years with the clinical programs has been fantastic, because there is multidisciplinary team. There are groups of individuals who are all actively looking to improve the outcome of their patients. Okay, so what we're doing is making sure that the output of their audit, and not only our audits but anything that's going on through the system, the NICWIS, there is both in histopathology, radiology and endoscopy, there is already really valid information within hospitals. So we ask that a hospital at governance level, with their CEOs, with their clinical directors and their risk managers, sit down and review the output. Okay, so let's inform the practice first of all at hospital level, and people and individuals in hospitals will then make the decisions and be able to act on change that is required themselves. And then at a national level, inform service as to where it should be delivered. Are we seeing the right patients in the right hospital all of the time? Do we need services open for 24 hours a day in 42 acute hospitals around the country, or do we need a concentrated effort in hospitals that can be staffed and manned fully with professionals who actually are seeing those cases all of the time? Mm-hmm. So we've already started that process, but it's going to take time. We were only commissioned in 2012, and we've actually come a long way in that short period of time.
And you're funded completely through the HSE? Completely
through the HSE, through Quality Improvement Division, through Philip Crowley's directorate.
Great. Any other questions from the audience? Have we any hands up there? Oh, we've quite a few at the back here. Rowdy bunch. Okay, who's first?
Yeah, just in terms of the public, sharing health data or data about their medical records, can you see any trends? Like, I guess, if you compare younger generations with older generations, do you see any trends or trends across gender? Or I guess for something like Project Mine, do you see maybe that other countries have different attitude towards sharing their data than we might have here in Ireland?
There's one trend that springs to mind straight away. 10, 12 years ago, the National Programme for IT and the NHS trying to get the NHS to share meds, allergies and adverse reactions for every patient in the country. And the first thing that derailed that project was 3 years' debate about consent and how to take consent and whether it should be shared. Caldecott Guardian, a piece of policy, for want of a better word, in the UK, in the NHS, was at that point very much about protecting information, not sharing. Caldecott 2, which is led by Dame Fiona Caldecott, now has almost reversed that. The point now is to share first and for the good of the patient and clinician first, and protect data second, flipping it on its head. So the trend is very much to move away from secure at all costs and move to share for the good of the patient and the safety and healthcare of the patient. And that's really, really been a strong piece.
That's interesting. We have other questions. There's another person towards the back.
Thank you. Just following on about that whole thing about sharing data, the care data initiative in the NHS seriously came off the rails recently because of bad management, particularly with regard to the potential for commercial use of the data, which was one of the intents of the NHS. And assuming that maybe at some stage we do get to take some big initiative here, maybe along the lines that Orla has suggested of a national institute, what lessons have you learned, Richard, that will make sure we don't have a public relations disaster then as well? A bit like Irish water.
Thanks for that.
Pressure.
Care.data and CPRD and using information for clinical research, my personal view is that we have to collect consent to use information that identifies the patient for clinical research, whether that's for health or wealth or both of the nation. What we've done with the individual health identifier from the very beginning, learning a lesson before we even start from the UK in particular, but other jurisdictions, is to create 2 consent flags. One is assumed consent for clinical sharing, so share your information for clinical purposes unless you get in touch and say no thank you. The other is a consent flag for sharing information for clinical research. The assumption is that everybody says no until we change that.
So it's opt-in or opt-out? Okay.
Yeah. In the UK, there are 16 different registries that are supposed to be national registries that collect consent for sharing information. In Ireland, we have 1, and we have 1 before we start, even considering how we do that. The thorny issue of making available information for clinical research needs to be managed very carefully. Nobody wants their data to be sold. But people do want their data to be used to improve clinical outcomes, to improve research into their illness, to make them better or people like them better. And I think we have to find a path that avoids the media furore that certainly hit care.data. One thing I won't be doing, though, is standing up and saying, let's sell your data for £1, which perhaps wasn't the most sensible thing to have done.
Can I comment on that? There's 2 points, really. So I think the consent for utilisation of data is really important, but we need to, there is a kind of a balance about this around the utility for healthcare planning purposes, and the Cancer Registry got a specific derogation for consent for putting a registry, which in my opinion was correct. Yeah. Just sort of walking into the idea around the ethical approval for research. One of the things that really do really badly in Ireland is that we have hundreds of ethics committees. I don't know how many. I know of at least 78 ethics committees because one of my colleagues here was doing a study where she told me she needed 77 approvals, but actually said no, actually 78 because of Trinity as well. So I mean that's ridiculous. So one of the things that the UK has got right is that you have a single ethics approval body, and something like an NIHR could do that. We could really harmonise how we approve.
We must be really careful not to underestimate the amount of time that took to put in place.
It doesn't mean that we shouldn't think about it, though.
No, it absolutely doesn't.
Just because it takes time.
It took 5 years. The UK was starting clinical trials, and it was taking 222 days on average. When so December last year, it was then taking 21 3/4 days on average to start a clinical trial through.
Yeah.
And this isn't just about technology, and I hate, even as a CIO, I hate to put technology in there, but technology facilitated the change in that behaviour, allowed that to happen.
Now, to be fair, we have a centralised ethics mechanism for clinical trials in Ireland. If you get approval to do a clinical trial in one hospital, that approval actually does spread, can be utilised in other hospitals. But for all other types of clinical research, each hospital, each entity requires a separate approval process, and that really is very detrimental to undertaking research that improves outcomes as well, actually.
So the onus is on the researcher to hoof around to every single place and every single committee and get it
Now,
signed
if we
off.
had a more of an umbrella approach to this, it could resolve this. One of the other things another point I'd like to make is around the concept of the idea of research at all within the HSE. Traditionally, and particularly more recently with the crisis in funding that the HSE has had, there's been not a huge amount of interest in building research programs, even research programs that inform healthcare. So, for example, the HSE and the Health Research Board had a joint programme to fund young doctors who wanted to do clinical research, and that died. That programme died for lack of funding from the HSE. So one of the things that we really need to do is embed the concept of quality research back within the HSE so that the HSE can inform its own research strategy, and we haven't done that yet. One of the things that Sally Davis and the NIHR in the UK has done is that they've actually funded positions to engage in research. It's all very well to say that clinicians, busy clinicians don't like filling out forms. That's definitely true. We hate it. And one of the problems about clinical research in Ireland is that a lot of it is rubbish because we don't have time, or clinicians won't, or we have incomplete ascertainment because people are just too busy and that we don't have enough. I mean, our number of, and we're just talking about hospital care here, it's even worse in the community, but our numbers of specialists in Ireland is way below the numbers of specialists anywhere else in Europe. There are still more neurologists in Mongolia than there are in Ireland. So we have to really recognise that in order to generate good quality research, good quality data that helps us to inform research, we have to be really willing to put our money where our mouths are, and that means funding the work. It means funding the bodies to do the work, and that really does mean putting in people who are research oriented, but who are also clinically trained and not just doctors within the milieu, and that we're not really doing that at the moment, and that gets back to my original point.
This is the clinician scientist, more or less.
Yeah, so people like me, who are clinicians and
a
scientists.
rare breed.
A rare breed. I'm
you're
unique.
a rare breed. Richard, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I think there's just one thing that you have to always remember. Dame Sally goes to government and asks for money to fund the NIHR.
Yeah, not blaming you.
But it is just worth making it really clear. When you talk, you say the HSE stopped funding that. But maybe
the government
it's time
stopped giving the HSE to
and
fund.
we need to be really clear where the money comes from to make that happen. Some of the things that happened in the NHS is that every NHS organisation has to, as part of their mandate, as part of receiving their grant, do clinical research. Now, some NHS organisations recruit one patient to achieve that. Others recruit hundreds of thousands. There were 690,000 people took part in clinical research in the NHS last year. That's a phenomenal number. When we have now reconfigured the hospital groups, each of the hospital groups has an academic partner. That is to enthuse clinical research in clinical practice. And we must remember that the steps that the HSE can take in the funding parameters it has today, it is desperately trying to do.
No, I accept that, and I'm not actually, even though it's great fun to blame the HSE, I do understand the funding deficit, and I mean, we've been, anybody who works in a clinical domain understands that, because it is very, all the hospitals have had their budgets cut. But the point is that in order for us to develop policy, we do need to make research, and the value and importance of data generation, which is generally what research is, that needs to be really placed in a much higher level of requirement. We need, and we're not actually doing that. The HSE, because it's playing catch up and really trying to survive, I suppose, hasn't really prioritised that, and it should really be a high priority, and we should be feeding that back to the Department of Health, which has also had its budget cut.
Absolutely, it's not a luxury by any means. Fiona, did you want to come in there?
I did, and I suppose it's answering or trying to come in on all. we're talking HSE or government in the UK and government here, and impacting and how one feeds the other and who feeds the beast and who's actually paying for all of this. I think I have to speak to it because if Ken Mealy was here, he would have. One of our, I suppose, biggest roadblockers, and I could upset poor Richard and talk about all the IT roadblocks we've had along the way in the last 3 years, but they're all going to change now, Richard, now that we've got e-health and all that good stuff. But apart from the trying to manipulate systems and get good data back at hospitals that all have different information systems, some have none whatsoever, and some have things they bought from God knows where, and somebody else has, yes, this was a national approved project. So there's all of that minefield to go through, so I really don't envy you your job. But what the clinicians actually want is the output of the data, be it good, where with the source that they will contribute good data if they've got mechanisms to get it out. So that's one thing. When it comes to the other side of, we then have the data and we know the type of audit or research that we want to actually carry out. From our perspective in the National Office of Clinical Audit, the project that actually started us off was an audit of surgical mortality, which was to allow us to do peer-to-peer review from surgeon to surgeon and anaesthetist to anaesthetist. And we have that system ready to go, and we had surgeons in the country and we had anaesthetists in the country all actually supporting that this was absolutely the right thing to do, to actually look at the outcomes of our patients, the good and the bad, so we could learn and we could inform learning from the ground up, okay? And one of the reasons we actually had to park that particular project was the lack of a health information bill in Ireland, okay? So the register in Cork that doesn't need consent from patients had the benefit in a previous minister's time of the foresight of locking it and putting it into a practitioner's bill at the time, okay? We haven't had that luxury, and we're still waiting on the health information bill. I came optimistic to this piece of work 4 years ago.
The health information bill has been cooking for a while.
It's coming for a long time,
yeah.
A long time. But the point is that it's not only for the protection for what we need for this particular type of audit that we want to do peer-to-peer review, because it needs protection if you want clinicians to actually be honest and give you the actual what is going on or not, as the case may be. It's also a requirement for the transferring of information. I feel, and from as much as I know, the unique identifier is not going to be enough to help the sharing of information from individual site to individual site. We manage patients in private and public settings all of the time. People don't necessarily understand that within the structure of the funded HSE hospitals, we also have voluntary sector hospitals that are into that mix as well. So at the moment, any of the work we do, every hospital we go to, we have to go through this privacy impact assessment to make sure that we're considering, so this is to answer Declan McGee, for all of our audits, we're making sure that at no point have we got any chance of data leakage, or how are we managing the data? Is it de-identified? Is it identifiable? If it's identifiable, we have to have consent. If it's consent, how are we going to document it? How can patients then withdraw their consent? So it's huge to actually even set about any of these particular projects. But when you have roadblockers such as that, we could actually make things better with the introduction of a health information bill that would allow our clinicians to share data for the right reasons, well then it actually becomes even more wearisome. And you mentioned being cynical earlier on. I'm trying really hard not to be.
Not publicly. So the health information bill, basically that's this piece of legislation which is supposedly going to provide a framework for data sharing. What are your thoughts on the bill?
We were informed literally last week that the health information and patient safety, the HIPS, is a single figure weeks away from being in place. So being put to people for consideration and then to go through the mechanisms that are required to do that. A privacy impact assessment, I believe, is a good mechanism to go through regardless of what is in the health information bill and how and what legislation that puts in place around clinical research though and the use of information, because a privacy impact assessment, and we're going through that publicly at the moment for the individual health identifier, it gives people confidence in what you're doing with their data. And I think that's a really strong and important thing to still go through.
Yeah. Could you have a privacy impact assessment one?
Why not?
And not go to the other 77 institutions?
Absolutely, why not? Why not put a privacy impact assessment framework in place that actually looks at the information systems and the information needs of research across Ireland, across health, do it once, it would be a big piece of work, but do it once and then call off that and use that as the framework.
That's going to be a deal breaker, isn't it? If people don't feel that you're going to be using the data in a way that's ethical, that's private, it's not going to be sold, it's not going to leak out somewhere, there's not going to be any Ashley Madison type things going on. We had a question up here, I think. A gentleman up here had his hands up at one stage.
How will this work in practice if we take the maternal and newborn management system and we want a population level data set of congenital anomalies? Are we going to have people opting out of what needs to be population level? Are we going to have identifiers for them to be able to follow them prospectively through the system? I was at a conference recently where there's 50 years of check data on heart defects, but they had to delete the identifiers because of data protection regulations. So how will we work in practice with a data set like that where we need population coverage for rare outcome research around issues like birth defects?
So from a maternity and newborn system, it is a single system. So it's a single electronic health record across the 19 sites across Ireland that provide that solution. Once it's implemented, the individual health identifier will be applied, and with appropriate data protection elements being worked through, that information could be used for research purposes. Now, we know that the data protection elements around clinical research are in, shall we say, flux from an EU point of view. We also know that they are complex to work through. There is also no getting round them, no matter how good or how important the research outcome is that we're trying to do. So we need to work through and with the data protection legislation and office to make sure that what we're doing is correct. The individual health identifier is a central index and identifier that is then fed into any electronic health records that exist to make sure that they're consistent as people flow through the system, as opposed to a health record that's held centrally. So the information about health is out in the local systems. The consent flag I spoke about is where a patient decides they don't want their information to be moved or shared, almost regardless of outcome, from if they're a patient in Cork and they happen to be in Dublin. They've ticked that flag to say, regardless, I don't want to have my information shared, and that's how that could be used in the future.
Okay, anybody else? We've got a gentleman over here. Oh, sorry, I can't see.
We can't see.
Hello, my question is about the bottom line, not the clinical side at all. Are you employing external computer firms to provide the expertise for all of this stuff? So I'm looking at it from the cost point of view and from the ethical point of view, because I seem to remember reading in Britain that this computer thing went on for 10 years, hundreds and hundreds of millions, up to $1 billion spent on doing something with data within the NHS, and at the end of 10 years they didn't have a system because I have no
Ireland,
idea.
was it?
So as I said, a bottom line question.
Okay.
Computers.
So IT's not free. I think the starting point as we go into this is I have a very, very small budget compared to other countries to put technology on desks of clinicians. And if we don't put money to invest in IT, then it won't arrive and we can't do the things we're talking about. The description you have of the National Programme for IT is a media story around the National Programme for IT. The original budget for MP Fit was 12 billion. The end spend was 1 billion. The media would have you believe that it didn't deliver anything, except for the fact that there is broadband to every NHS organisation. There is secure email to 1.2 million people. There's choose and book for every patient in the country. There's meds, allergies and adverse reactions in an emergency situation for 55 million people. Electronic prescriptions, and on and on and on. The 1 billion that was spent was money that the NHS now say was well spent. At the time, it was a difficult period of time, and a huge amount of consultants lived in Leeds, where it was run from, to run what actually didn't move as quickly. Any healthcare organisation and business change around healthcare organisation is a big ship to turn, and it requires business change, not technology. I'm a CIO that doesn't want to have IT projects. I want to have business change projects that IT facilitates, and that's my ambition by 2020, that there won't be any IT projects in Ireland in health. There'll be business change projects that use IT to deliver it. The budget and the solution to deliver the individual health identifier That has been built inside infrastructure that already existed, the PCRS, the Primary Care Reimbursement Service. So there hasn't been huge additional budget put into the delivery of an individual health identifier. To deliver an electronic health record for Ireland will require investment. But back to being open and transparent, the organisation that I represent, eHealth Ireland, has published the case for change. Rather than keep that a secret, keep that as something that we don't tell people, we've gone out and said, IT isn't free. If you want these benefits of having an electronic health record, then this is the kind of money you need to spend. You do need to employ external computer, as you phrased it, organisations to deliver. We couldn't sit in a darkened room and deliver that ourselves with 288 staff without actually not being able to support hospitals have technology on their desks.
Can I comment just really quickly on the epilepsy electronic health electronic patient register, because that actually it's a really good example of being able to generate a research project and then feed it back in. That was HRB funded.
Project.
It was funded by the Health Research Board.
Initially,
my
and then
colleague
HSE as well.
Norman Delanty set it up in Beaumont, and it's now it's a fabulous resource, and that is a really good example of what we could do. It's another learning example of things that could go really well if they're done properly.
Absolutely. Cliona, I can actually see you because you're in the front row. You're near the light. Okay.
It's kind of a related question to what was up here, from the point of view of the skills requirement. You come at it from an institute, an educational delivery institutes like universities and medical schools and RCSI. Are we changing the skills that we're providing with people? So you say the computational skills, the mindset for how you actually record. I think there's a big shift required in the people coming out, and I would have thought that Ireland should be able to deliver the software and the infrastructure, but are we able to, and where do we actually address the skill set shortage?
Okay, so I think there's two questions in there. Skill set of people using the systems absolutely is now more and more part of education to become a clinician of whatever sort. Now there is an element that is a bugbear of mine though, which is that some elements of health provision across the globe would have you believe that we need to train people in how to use IT. And yet most of you probably have got a smartphone in your pocket and know how to do this. And actually the fallacy of a nurse, and this is a true story from a couple of weeks ago where I was told that we need to train a nurse how to use a mouse because she would pick it up and rub the screen, is just rubbish. We need to move away from that fallacy. People know how to use technology to deliver whatever they need to do. And absolutely, I think the analytics side of where we go.
I bet you that wasn't a woman said that.
If I could come in on the analytics and on the back end of the data that is produced and the output of audit or be it research, we're supporting the clinicians on the ground to interpret the data, because data is only as good as the numbers that come out the other end. The interpretation and the correct interpretation of that is extremely important. So from our perspective, what we do is we're working both with nursing and all of the specialties. So as we have a touch point, which whatever the audit stream is, making sure that they actually understand the information that comes out of it. That if there is a signal that warrants further review, that they know how to do it. But we're working to go further back to, I suppose, with the training bodies, and certainly through RCSI and through RCPI, to look at, well, how can we get in at ground level so that clinical audit is understood by the individuals who are going to collect what is just chart information. So chart information is the beginning of research, and the patient's chart is the first stepping block towards getting to either Orla's research or our clinical audit. And no amount of excellent IT systems are going to change the quality of the information that actually goes in at the point of care that happens at the bedside. So it's trying to inform that process, that they understand, that those undergrads actually start to understand that the importance of quality, that they record in quality information at that outset, is the beginning of what will be the future of research and clinical audit.
Develop that mindset. Now, I know we're slightly running over time. Did you want to come in here?
Only that it was those 4 pillars as well that we talked about. You've got data, you've got information that delivers insight, that creates knowledge. Knowledge is personal. You only have knowledge through education and applying that knowledge to the data that was originally put in.
Okay, so it's a good sign that we're running over time. Always a good sign in a discussion. But I think I can see 2 hands. Apologies now if I can't see any others, but we'll have 2 more questions. First here.
Hi, thanks very much. So my question is exactly about those analytic skills and research in particular. So all across Ireland right now, there are computer science departments that are hosting master's students coming in to learn the analytic skills, right? These are people who don't have any medical background at all. But what they're out looking for is they're basically about 6 weeks to find their master's thesis project. And that's pretty much conditional on finding data. So they're not necessarily walking in with a question. They're out looking for questions over the next 6 weeks, right? They basically got about 6 weeks to go and get a data set and then go do their research for the year on that data set, right? And so many of them are going to go off and use, and I'm one of them, going to go off and look for whatever data they can get available to them, and they give their right arms to be solving useful problems, in the world of healthcare, as opposed to maybe, other still useful problems, but in other fields like, financial ones or betting agencies or any of that kind of stuff. That's pretty common for that type of program. So I guess what I was coming tonight to ask you was, are there data sets available that people who are looking to develop those analytical skills can work on in the healthcare field, where they won't have to spend 2, 3, 4 months fighting an access process to get access to that data before they even know whether or not there's a question in that data set that they'd like to answer? And are there any people in the I guess the healthcare field who have that domain experts, want these students every year, and can kind of point them in the direction?
This is like Match.com
go study this
for
stuff.
research, isn't it?
Where's the data that we can actually get access to? I guess is really the question I'm asking.
Yeah. We love mathematicians. We love computer scientists. We have data.
Okay, you heard it here first. Match made in heaven. Final question.
I'm coming from the other perspective. I'm a clinician and I'm trying to engage with IT, and obviously there's massive limitations and budget issues in the hospital. Is there any mechanism to increase collaboration with businesses and with universities? I suppose because of data protection we're limited, but there needs to be kind of strategies and mechanisms to circumvent that, and what would be the plan that way? Because I know Google are huge into big data at the moment. Like, we could actually be pioneers in this area and actually use Ireland as a model to sell to other countries around the world, but we're just limited because of restrictions at the moment.
So you used a phrase then that is a scary phrase to end up outside of this room, which was circumvent data protection. Let's not try and work out how to circumvent data protection.
No. I said limitations within the Irish healthcare system. I did not say circumvent data protection. I said,
and that is one of the problems. Is we need to work out within the confines of legislation that exists, not just in Ireland but across the EU, how we can facilitate access to information and work with some of the most amazing small companies that have some phenomenal technology and some phenomenal ideas across Ireland to do and move in the right space. One of the things the HSE did this year was to partner with the NDRC on the Future Health Programme to make sure that we start to try and find ways to open the door to innovation within health. One of the difficulties that the HSE has around enabling innovation to work with us is that we're strung up by the procurement rules and legislation that's in place. It is very, very difficult for us to agree and buy things that are small, new innovations in technology. But it is my own personal guarantee and ambition that we will drive every way we can through to actually enable that, both from a technology point of view, a data access point of view, and an engaging with new innovative solutions to get at those things. We've partnered strongly with Sláinte Healthcare. We've worked closely with IMS Maxims, two big Irish healthcare IT providers that previously hadn't really been able to find how to get the engagement that they needed to. And I really do believe in health and wealth of the nation through being able to engage with these organisations and work in that way.
Okay, great. Now, to finish off, I'm going to pounce on our panellists a little bit and just ask them, what would you like to see happen in Ireland over the next few years? Fiona?
I just want, I suppose, what we've actually started is still very young. It's like the child off to creche. I want to see it all the way through to college. and make sure that we get the continued support. We have the support at the moment now of, obviously, from the HSE's backing. The Department of Health are also very supportive, and they're understanding that it is very valuable information that we have started on a road to collect. And I see the potential for what we're doing to be nearly too big. Okay. In that there is so much that could actually be done. There's so many, the amount of calls we get from really well-intentioned clinicians who have particular projects that need just a little bit of love and support to be brought into a situation that it could actually be really, really valuable in a national perspective. And it's to do with resourcing and time, and things take time to evolve. So I really, my wish for the three bones, the backbone and all the others, for the wishbone, is that we actually continue to have support, and I suppose the more than just financial support, the support of all the training bodies and all the institutions to actually value the output of the information. I think that's really, really important.
Good stuff. Richard, your wish?
So over 3 years to have finished to the point where we have a foundation and building blocks to deliver an electronic health record, to deliver a digital fabric for Ireland, and then from 3 to 5 years away to actually facilitate what the gentleman said there, where you have an idea, you have a solution you want to put in place, we add it to those building blocks and can genuinely describe the digital fabric of Ireland that supports healthcare as being innovative and leading the way. And I do genuinely believe it is a possibility.
Good stuff. And Orla, let me guess what your wish is.
World peace and love.
It's not the road to Tralee now.
I think I'm about 45 years to it.
I was going to sing.
Prioritise research as a matter of urgency. Support the development of young, clever children who are in medical school and computer science to build a research programme and build that into a properly structured and politically independent institute of health research. That's inured against political interference. That's better than world peace, actually, I think.
I think so it just remains for me to thank you for coming along this evening and being such an engaged audience, and also our panellists, Professor Orla Hardiman, Fiona Cahill and Richard Corbridge. Thank you.